The air that enters doesn't enter just the lungs. There is another breath, subtler, older, more real, that doesn't move with the chest, but with awareness. And almost no one realizes they breathe with it. Because this breath makes no sound, doesn't rush, and isn't measured in volume. It vibrates. It vibrates with what you're feeling right now. It vibrates with the silent image behind your words, behind your effort, behind your fear. The body breathes oxygen, but who you are breathes states. It breathes unspoken memories. It breathes inherited tensions. It breathes futures that never arrived because the past still takes up space in the chest. Most people think breathing is just physiology, but it's vibrational technology, the bridge between what you observe and what you create. The observer within you doesn't inhale air, it inhales frequency, and maybe the tiredness you feel doesn't come from the life you're living, but from the breath you're repeating, the same anxious, fragmented, disconnected breath that feeds the illusion of separation. Have you ever wondered what your body is trying to hold on to when you forget to breathe? In the absence of air, something clings, but in the presence of the observer, something dissolves. And that's when the twist happens, the real twist, the silent turning point, realizing that what connects you to reality isn't what you do with the body, but what you vibrate with your presence. The observer's breath doesn't follow chronological time, it follows the time of the soul, and that changes everything you thought you knew about the now. From here, we'll go through layers, and maybe, for the first time, you'll feel like you've never truly breathed. The breath you know is just the shell, an automatic movement conditioned, domesticated by a body that learned to survive. But there is another breath, one not measured in volume but in vibration, a breath that begins before the air and ends long after the exhale. This breath happens in the gap between what you feel and what you avoid feeling, between what you accept and what you're still resisting in silence. It moves like a subtle wave. It doesn't inflate the lungs. It expands perception. It doesn't exchange gases. It transmutes states. The veil between air and awareness is so thin you almost never notice it, but it's there, always. And that's why, even breathing all day, there are moments when everything feels like it's missing. Missing air, missing peace, missing life, because it's not the air that's missing, it's presence. The observer's breath isn't made of muscle contractions, but of vibrational surrender. It happens when the body isn't fighting, when the past isn't pressing, when thought gives way to listening. Observe now, how is your breath? Maybe it's short, hurried, heavy. Maybe you didn't even notice you were holding it, as if life had frozen inside. And if so, don't judge yourself. Because this isn't just habit, it's memory, it's protection, it's ancestral trauma echoing into today. The body learned to breathe in fear. The nervous system built a pattern of alertness, an invisible radar that scans for dangers that may no longer exist, but are still felt as real. And so, without noticing, you breathe the frequency of survival, even when you're safe. You breathe the abandonment of an unhealed childhood. You breathe the urgency of a love that was never complete. You breathe the guilt of having paused, even when everything inside begs for silence. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Now think, how many unconscious breaths are deciding your fate right now? The unconscious also breathes. It inhales memories and exhales patterns. It breathes in unexpressed pain and returns automatic reactions. It lives in the space between an emotion and its rationalization. And there, in the middle of the invisible storm, lies the key to transformation. When the observer breathes, something within pauses. Not time, but repetition. Conscious breathing isn't slow just to calm. It's slow because it's listening. Listening to what the body couldn't say, what the soul is trying to show, what reality is reflecting like a mirror that you still refuse to look at. To breathe, as the observer, is not a technique. It's surrender. It's recognizing that the breath doesn't belong to you, it passes through you, that you don't control the air, you witness it. And maybe the true miracle is not in pulling the air in, but in allowing it to reveal what's trapped. Most people inhale to live, but the observer inhales to remember what it means to be whole, to be present, to simply be. And in that state, everything changes, because breath that flows with awareness is a language. a wordless prayer, a subtle technology that silently reprograms all that once seemed impossible to change. The body begins to release, the mind loses its urgency, the heart finally makes space. It's not magic, it's presence. And maybe that's why the most transformative moments of your life didn't come with shouting or big decisions, but with silences, with pauses, with an unexpected sigh, with a tear that fell for no apparent reason, with that moment when time stopped, and you breathed differently, without even noticing. That breath was your soul touching you, and if you allow it, it can become the new pattern, a pattern of lightness, of listening, of communion between the visible and the invisible. Hers, it was never just air. It is the messenger of the unseen, the code of life in the form of flow, and now maybe you're beginning to remember that, because the body breathes, but the one who feels the breath is the observer. There's a space between inhalation and exhalation that almost no one notices, a pause so brief and yet so full of everything. There, between what enters and what leaves, lies the presence of who you truly are. This silence, which has no sound but has density, is where time seems to bend, where urgency dissolves, where the outer world loses importance, and where the observer can finally breathe without rush, without mask, without past. Maybe you felt this space without knowing how to name it. In those seconds when everything hung in suspension, before the cry, before the laughter, before the decision. It's always there that truth begins to whisper. It's not the air that creates this space. It's awareness that reveals it. Most people live as if every moment must be filled. The air comes and goes in a hurried sequence, as if pausing were forbidden, as if the pause meant death, mistake, or weakness. But the opposite is true. In the pause there is life, there is choice, there is possibility. It's in this subtle interval that you stop being the character and return to being the center. The body, trained by the urgency of survival, resists silence. It wants movement, it wants control, it wants to know what's next, but the observer doesn't need to know. It only needs to be. And to be, you must feel what exists in the in-between. That in-between is the womb of the new. There you are neither past nor future, neither expectation nor memory. You are simply awareness resting in the now, a presence so dense it doesn't need to prove anything to exist. Thoth taught that rhythm governs all, that there's a flow in everything that vibrates. But the secret lies in realizing that between each vibration, there is a resting point, and it is in that point that the leap happens. You don't leap from air to air. You leap from the silence between breaths. The leap in reality, in identity, in perception, is born from this non-place, this micro-eternity, where the mind can't reach, but the soul recognizes. And then something begins to yield. You no longer need to breathe to control. You can breathe to observe. You can use the air as a mirror, as language, as reconnection. Observe now again. What happens to you in the instant between one breath and the next? Is there fear? Is there peace? Is there emptiness? Is there tension? The answer reveals the vibration you're inhabiting, because your state of being isn't measured by what you say, but by what you feel when you're doing nothing. And that's why so many feel exhausted. Even without great effort, they are breathing mechanically, without pause, without presence, without real vibration. And without noticing, they feed the cycle of repetition. The body goes into autopilot, the emotions shut down, and the vibrational field becomes a dull mirror. But when you begin to notice the space between breaths, something different happens. The mind slows, the body listens, the soul responds. You don't need to seek anything in this space. It wasn't made to be filled, it was made to be felt. The pause between breaths is the altar where awareness touches the sacred with no intermediaries. And in that invisible altar, you begin to sense a silent truth. It's not breath that sustains you, it's presence. Air only serves life when there is someone to feel it, and that someone is you, beyond everything you've learned to be. That's why the observer's breath doesn't serve anxiety. It serves expansion. It isn't demanding. It doesn't require posture, time, technique, or setting. It only asks for sincerity. It only happens when you stop trying to control, when you let go of the need to get it right, and simply allow yourself to be. And in that being, everything realigns. Chaos settles, vibration rises, Reality responds, because what was blocking the flow wasn't the world. It was the interval you were ignoring. This space between breaths is a crack in the fabric of illusion, a door to the real, and when you enter it, even for a moment, you are no longer the same, because there, you feel you're no longer trying to breathe. You are being breathed, and that difference changes everything. The way you breathe is the way you live. There is no separation between the air that enters and the emotion that dwells within. When the body inhales, it is listening. When it exhales, it is releasing. But what it hears depends on the frequency you emit, and what it releases depends on what you are ready to let go of. The observer's breath is more than a practice. It is a mirror, a perfect reflection of your inner vibration, not of what you think, but of what you feel when no one is watching. It reveals without judgment. It amplifies what is present. It shows with silent precision the frequency you are holding right now, and that's why it can be uncomfortable at times, because it shows everything that is still tense, contracted, forgotten, everything the body had to hide in order to survive, everything you've pushed under the emotional rug, but that still breathes with you. When you hold your breath, something inside is trying not to feel. When you sigh too much, something is asking for relief. When you breathe in the upper chest, life is happening on the surface. But when the air descends, slow and deep, it is a sign that the body is returning home. Most people breathe just to keep functioning, but few breathe to find themselves. And maybe that's why so many changes don't happen, because they're attempted with the body in defense, with the heart in resistance, with the breath still aligned to the old. The air around you is not neutral. It is information in the form of frequency. It is charged with field, and this field responds to what you vibrate. You inhale the world as it is, but you exhale the world as you are. And in this back and forth, you create a reality that matches what you hold in silence. That's why even in silence your field is speaking. It is emanating, it is shaping. What the observer learns by breathing with presence is that the outer world is not a fixed fact, but a vibrational translation of the inner state, and that there is no point in asking for change without altering the rhythm of one's own being. Breathing with presence is an act of alignment, an alignment so subtle it seems too simple, but it is there, in simplicity, that real power lives. Because while you try to change your behavior, the breath still repeats the pattern. While you desire a new reality, the body still vibrates with the frequency of unprocessed pain. While you seek expansion, the air still moves under the command of ancestral fear. But when the observer takes the center, something shifts without effort. It's not about controlling the breath, it's about letting it become conscious. The quantum field doesn't respond to words, nor to isolated wishes. It responds to the dominant vibration, and the breath is vibration in motion. Each inhalation is a seed, each exhalation a portal of release. When you breathe with anger, you feed the field with contraction. When you breathe with acceptance, the field opens. When you breathe with gratitude, not the forced kind, but the one that rises from the center, the field blooms and begins to return compatible signs. Breathing, then, is communicating with the invisible, and maybe you've never realized how much your breaths were begging for presence, for truth, for relief. The breath does not lie, it only reveals. And when it becomes a reflection of what is true, it begins to cleanse, to transmute, to align. The body, once living in battle, finds refuge. The mind, once noisy, comes to rest. The soul, once stifled, begins to sing again, with tones you had forgotten existed. It's not fast, it's not magical, but it's real. And the moment you breathe consciously, even for seconds, the world around you no longer vibrates the same. Because those who observe differently begin to be observed differently, and the breath, which once was merely physiology, now becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, everything is revealed, including you. The body remembers what you have already forgotten, but it doesn't remember with words. It remembers with rhythm, and that rhythm breathes for you. Every time the air enters in a rush, something inside is trying to escape. A memory, a sensation, a moment frozen in time. What we call anxiety is often just the soul's attempt to free itself from a cycle the body still hasn't let go of. Because the body is not convinced by ideas, it is convinced by vibration, by repetition, by felt safety. And the first place where that safety shows up is in the breath. There are memories the brain no longer accesses, but the lungs still carry. A shortened breath may be the echo of an old fright, of an unnamed abandonment, of a silence that turned into defense, of a loss that never had space to hurt. The breath reveals what was silenced, what didn't fit into words, what had to be swallowed in order to keep going. And so, when you begin to observe how you breathe, you realize you are not just breathing the now, you are breathing everything that ever was. That's why conscious breathing can sometimes be frightening, because when the body is touched by presence, it begins to return frozen memories, not as clear recollections, but as resurfacing sensations, a tightness, a knot, a sudden urge to cry without knowing why. But this is not regression, it is healing. Breath brings back what needs to be revisited, not so that you suffer again, but so that you can move through it differently. Because what binds you is not the original pain, it is the unconscious cycle that repeats it every day. And that cycle breathes with you. It breathes when you rush for no reason, when you stay silent in the face of what wounds you, when you say yes while meaning no, when you disconnect from the now because you're stuck in what's already gone. And all of this has a pattern, a rhythm, a frequency. The body, like a silent drum, vibrates according to the music it has learned. And the breath, is the beat. It is the invisible conductor that leads the entire field. But there is a subtle choice that few notice. To change the rhythm of your breath is to change the soundtrack that supports your reality, not as magic but as coherence. Because when the air enters differently, the field responds differently. And this different isn't forced. It arises from the meeting with what is true, with what you avoided feeling, with what the body carried alone for years. The observer's breath doesn't seek immediate comfort, it seeks truth, and that's why sometimes it's uncomfortable. It brings up suppressed anger, muffled sadness, denied fear, but only because now there is space to welcome it, space created by presence. It is this presence that allows the body to release its armor, that lets the rhythm change, that gives permission for the body to rewrite its inner music. And when that happens, something organizes, something aligns, because the body is a field of memory, and air, a channel of reconnection. There are people who spend years seeking answers outside, but the answers are not in the future. They are in the rhythm of the now, in the way you inhale when you hear your own truth, in the way you exhale when you no longer need to defend yourself, in the way you breathe, when you remember you are alive. This remembrance is not rational, it is vibrational. It doesn't come through the mind, it comes through the silence that settles after a deep sigh, when the body, tired of fighting, finally surrenders. And in that surrender, the past begins to lose its grip. You don't need to understand all your pains. You only need to listen to what your body says when you breathe with it, not against it. Because there, between the air that enters and the air that leaves, lives a reunion. And maybe behind all your efforts, what you wanted most and was just this, to breathe again with truth, with peace, with presence. And this is already available now. There comes a moment when air stops being a function and starts being a passage. Not a physical passage like the flow of oxygen going in and out, but a silent crossing that opens dimensions within you. Breath, at this point, is no longer just biology. It becomes a bridge between worlds, an access point between layers of reality that once seemed separate and now begin to touch. You feel it when you breathe and time slows down, when thought bends, when your inner landscape changes color, when everything around you seems to remain in place, but something within you, it no longer vibrates the same. The observer's breath is a kind of code, a living movement that, when activated with presence, begins to open dormant frequencies in your field. It's not something you force, it's something you allow. And what it allows is the return to what was forgotten, to the wholeness that was fragmented, to the soul that was muffled by the noise of hurry, pain, and demand. Breathing truthfully is not just a spiritual practice, it is a gesture of remembrance, a retrieval of your original vibration. You might not even remember what your vibration was before fear, before trauma, before comparison, but the body knows, the soul knows, and the breath can take you back there. This is the secret few realize. Conscious breathing is not meant to relax you. It's meant to realign you, to collapse the versions of yourself you maintain out of inertia, and allow the version that vibrates in coherence with truth to emerge. You begin to notice that there are layers of yourself that have never breathed, frozen parts, forgotten, repressed, that have never received the air of your presence, and when they begin to be touched, life changes, because those parts were exactly what created the inner noise, the resistance, the repetition. When you breathe with them, and not in spite of them, something dissolves, and in that dissolving, a new reality becomes possible. But you have to cross through, and crossing hurts sometimes, because it demands that you stay present with what you've learned to avoid, with raw emotion, with the longing that was never embraced, with the fear of feeling. And it is at this point that breath becomes a portal, not to escape yourself, but to enter more deeply, to descend to the core, to allow the vibration of the now to transmute what time could not heal. There is no rush in this process, no goal. There is surrender. And in surrender, there is transformation. The surrounding field begins to change, not because you asked, but because your frequency shifted. People respond differently, situations begin to flow. Chaos loses strength. What was stuck starts to move, because reality responds to the breath of awareness, not to the effort of the ego. Lao Tzu said, "When I let go of who I am, I become what I might be." Breathing as the observer is exactly that, letting go of the one who fights, who controls, who rushes, to become the one who feels, who listens, who is. And in that being, everything reorganizes. There is no promise of perfection, but there is truth. And truth, even when uncomfortable, is always liberating. Breath as a portal does not require advanced technique, nor complex rituals. It only requires presence, the willingness to pause for a few moments and observe. How is the air inside your body? What is it trying to show? What is it still holding? And from that listening, a silent choice is born, to breathe differently and create differently. It's not the world that needs to change for you to feel at peace. It's your vibration that needs to align with what is real. And the first step in that alignment is air. Air as bridge, as symbol, as guide. It's been with you all along. It was only waiting for you to stop surviving so you could start breathing. Maybe the true miracle was never about changing your life, but about returning to the center that observes life without getting lost in it, returning to the silent point from which everything emanates, and where nothing needs fixing, only feeling. The observer's breath is that return, a return without effort, without goals, without urgency, a breath that doesn't ask for technique, but for truth. That doesn't demand control, but presence. And in that space, reality begins to bend to the frequency of your silence. You don't need to understand everything now, but if something within you opened, if a different sigh passed through your chest, it's already begun. If this crossing met your soul somewhere along the way, write in the comments, "I return with the breath." That way I'll know you made it to the end, and that something in you already breathes differently.